is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Stop selling airline tickets. The order from the UK's biggest airport. Heathrow struggles to process post-pandemic passenger numbers.
Our other headlines: level pegging. The euro falls to its lowest value against the US dollar in 20 years. We'll be in Brussels and New York with all the analysis.
In the next hour, we'll have the shortlist of candidates vying to become the leader of the Conservative Party and Britain's next Prime Minister.
And light from galaxies that's taken billions of years to reach us. The first colour images from NASA's new telescope.
Heathrow Airport has asked airlines to stop selling tickets for the summer as it struggles to cope with surging demand and chronic staff shortages. The UK's busiest airport is imposing a limit of 100,000 departing passengers a day until September the 11th.
It says this will help to provide better, more reliable summer journeys, but the move has been branded as ridiculous by the International Air Transport. Let's talk to Paul Charles, the Chief Executive Officer at travel PR firm the PC Agency. Paul, welcome. Heathrow imposing a daily cap of 100,000 departing passengers. Just put this into context for us, if you will. What does that mean in relation to the usual traffic of passengers through Heathrow on a normal day?
This is an unprecedented step by Heathrow to have to actually tell airlines to stop selling tickets. It's not been seen before. And normally Heathrow Airport would be looking at 120 to 130,000 passengers a day. So what they're saying is they're unable to process more than 100,000 passengers a day, a fifth lower than normal. And that's because, of course, of staff shortages, not just at Heathrow itself, but primarily among the ground handlers, the companies that are charged with ensuring we as passengers get a pretty smooth process through check-in and security and baggage handling. So it's admittance by Heathrow that they really aren't going to find more people in the next few weeks.
OK, and is this the last time we're going to be discussing this, or do you think that the problems at Heathrow, particularly in terms of the holiday season, could still take a further turn for the worse?
I'm afraid it's going to be a very choppy summer period. We're just going into the peak now. The busiest day is due to be the 29th of July and the 30th of July out of Heathrow in terms of departures. And I'm afraid that consumers are going to have to put up with pretty lengthy queues, even with that cap of 100,000 passengers a day. It's Heathrow saying they're at full stretch and they've had to hit the panic button. But it's still going to be a difficult summer.
What is at the core of Heathrow Airport's problems, and how does Heathrow compare to other large travel hubs across the world?
Heathrow is the worst performer in terms of cancellations for departures out of the UK, with London Gatwick a close second. But actually there are other airports around the world which are also doing pretty badly, especially Schiphol in Amsterdam, which has had a pretty horrendous few weeks trying to process passengers. You can also look at Dublin, which has had ongoing issues, Cologne Airport in Germany, and many others across Europe. And this is all because, of course, they've had a shortage of people to work back in the aviation industry post-pandemic, but also because workers have been calling in sick at short notice due to continuing COVID. So all of these issues have combined to mean that the gaps have not been filled in terms of the number of workers at our airports. And that's why consumers have found flights cancelled at the last minute. And I'm afraid they will continue to see some flights cancelled. The vast majority are going, the vast majority are scheduled as planned and are taking off. But about 3 to 4% of flights are not. And if you're caught up in that, it's extremely painful financially as well as emotionally.
OK, if you're planning your summer holiday, this is pretty depressing listening, frankly. What are the best ways for holidaymakers to safeguard this summer from a collapse of travelling plans?
Yes, it's extremely frustrating for consumers. The first thing, of course, is to do nothing at the moment if you have something pre-booked. The chances are your flight will take off as normal, but you should check in at the airport 2.5 to 3 hours before your flight. It's important also to say that the vast majority of flights being cancelled are actually short haul and not long haul. So if you're on a long flight, your chances are much greater of getting away on time this summer. I think the other thing is to look at seeing if you are booking for this peak period and you haven't booked yet, then try to book a flight that is early in the morning, perhaps 7 a.m., 8 a.m., because those flights are going out pretty well as scheduled and you've got more chance of taking off than later in the day. So ideally, you'd also choose to travel from a regional UK airport and a regional airport in Europe, because they've been seeing fewer cancellations than the big hubs such as Heathrow, Gatwick and Schiphol.
Paul, thank you very much indeed for that. That's Paul Charles there explaining the story at Heathrow. Well, the chaos is engulfing airports right across Europe, with strikes piling on even more pressure. Later, we'll be taking you to Spain, where a week of walkouts by Ryanair and EasyJet cabin crew could cause problems for European holidaymakers.
I'm Rahul Pathak, live from Madrid Barajas Airport, where we'll be talking to striking Ryanair staff about their grievances and how they're being ignored by employers and the Spanish government, and it's the passengers that are having to pay the price.
The euro has fallen to its lowest value against the US dollar in 20 years. It briefly hit parity on Tuesday morning. That's when $1 is the same value as €1. Now, the global economic uncertainties piled pressure onto the single currency, and at the same time, investors turn to the US dollar as a safe haven during moments of high volatility. Now, parity with the dollar is turning up the heat on the European Central Bank, which has been accused of not acting quickly enough to curb inflation across the Eurozone. In comparison, analysts think that the US Fed will continue to raise interest rates faster and further than its peers in a way of tackling the soaring cost of living. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is also weighing heavily on the euro. European governments fear the Kremlin will weaponize its fuel supplies due to Western opposition to the conflict. Lower energy supplies will cause inflation to rise even further, with European countries scrambling to find gas and oil ahead of winter. Now, these worries are fueling speculation of a global recession. Many economies were already weak as they recovered from the pandemic, with lots of governments now saddled with enormous debts and low growth. A weak euro could compound the problem, with European exports becoming cheaper and imports for European businesses becoming more expensive. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Laura McInishwood, who's in Brussels for us. Laura, how much flack should the European Central Bank take? And, you know, let's face it, are they really likely to change their plans?
Well, there are some analysts that are basically saying this decision by the ECB not to interject, to intervene sooner, saying basically that that's madness. And there are concerns, of course, that if the US Federal Reserve decides to up its interest rate hikes in the next few weeks and months, then that could damage the euro even further. Already the currency has fallen by a value of around 12% against the dollar in the year so far. So any further impacts could see even further falls in that value. Now, why is it happening? As you said, there's the war in Ukraine. That's having an impact worldwide on economies. We've seen issues with supply chains post-pandemic because of workforce shortages, and also, of course, those blockades that are taking place in the Black Sea that's preventing grain being exported from Ukraine and having impacts on the food supplies, potentially creating some kind of global food insecurity across the world as well. But one of the biggest dents that have been made in the last few weeks has been this concern that planned maintenance to the Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline, the main artery that brings gas from Russia to Europe, could actually turn into a long-term switch-off by Russia should the country decide to weaponize its energy. Of course, will create massive ramifications, have massive ramifications in Europe. And the European Commission is trying to shore up its supplies. But the knock-on effect at the moment is this impact on the euro and this potential for a long-term recession.
So what's this all going to mean for the money in our pockets. I'm just thinking about the impact for all of the millions of people living in the Eurozone who use the euro to buy basics.
Well, of course, anything that's bought in dollars will be far more expensive. You're not going to get as much money for, as much goods for your euro at all if you head to the shops. If you're paying utility bills, that is all going to be impacted. And around half of all imports that come into the Eurozone are paid for in dollars. So that is a lot of products that could see prices rising, which is also happening, of course, because the growing and inflating interest rates and inflation rates that the Eurozone is experiencing at the moment. What it could mean, though, for some industries that export their goods in dollars is that they see a bit of a boost, the likes of the aerospace industry, automotive industry as well. That could have a positive impact on them. And they could also see a bit of a tourism boost as well. Should it be that Americans, for instance, who pay for their holidays in US dollars, they could decide to come to Europe because it's seen as a cheaper destination now and bring with it their spending money too. But ultimately, there are big concerns about what could lie in the future. And we're looking ahead to Thursday as well, when the European Commission is likely to outline its predictions for growth in the coming months, and that's not looking good. So all eyes really are on the ECB, what the next things that they could do to try to prevent any further problems with the economy, or whether they might just wait and see if they can ride it out.
Thanks, Laura. Laura Mackin-Isherwood in Brussels. Let's head now to the New York Stock Exchange, where our correspondent John Terrett is following the story. Great to see you, John. Now, the US dollar is red hot. You know, what does it mean for the US economy and, of course, for people across the country?
Yeah, it really is red hot. I mean, remarkable to see it touching parity with the euro today. Quite a remarkable thing for economists to witness, albeit only happening relatively briefly. Of course, there are benefits to this and there are downsides as well. And it's funny because, you know, Juliet, the administration will never, ever talk about wanting a strong dollar. Very, very rarely. In fact, I mean, almost never. There was one, of course, who did. He was in office between 2016 and 2020. You know what his name was, and you probably know why he did it. But generally speaking, they don't talk up the dollar. Now, in the course of the last 12 months or so, the dollar has appreciated something like 8 to 15% against a basket of other currencies around the world. I think there are 16 of them. And it depends on which measure you take as to whether it was closer to 8% or closer to 15%. And the reason, as I think Laura was saying in her report just there, is exactly the same as it is in Europe there, the same thinking, and that is that we've got global uncertainty going on, and indeed so much of it. So there's inflation, there's the supply chain issues, and now there's the ongoing situation in Ukraine. And the bottom line is that big investors like pension schemes and governments and, you know, all sorts of major investors like to park their money, if they can, in a safe haven, and the dollar is seen as a safe haven. So to do that, they have to buy government bonds. To do that, they have to convert into dollars from their local currencies very often, and this all drives up the cost or the value of the dollar. And then the other reason, as Laura was saying, she's quite right, is that the Federal Reserve, the central bank here, is seen as being the central bank that will drive up the price of, or rather, in order to combat inflation, is going to, you know, push interest rates up faster and potentially higher than any other central bank in the world, certainly against the European Central Bank. So those are the reasons. Of course, a strong dollar is not great for US exports, and we do have some of the biggest companies in the world here who are exporting all over the world, names like Apple and Tesla, Elon Musk's company, and Procter & Gamble, the household goods company, and they have to juggle all of this. It rather depends on what season we're in and what political cycle we're in. If they have spare capacity, for example, in a factory outside the United States, they might increase the capacity there if it suits them in order to balance all this at the end of the day. I wouldn't worry too much about Apple, though. They do make $280 million a day, so they're going to be okay. But this is the kind of thinking that goes on if you are a major US exporter. Juliet?
And if you're an investor and you're buying dollars or you're investing in the United States, of course, with interest rates higher than in other parts of the world, you're going to earn more on those investments. So where do you think this leaves the US Central Bank, the Fed, in terms of the pace and the amount that they're raising interest rates?
Well, back in 1971, one of the Treasury secretaries, who's long since been forgotten, but back in 1971, when there was a kind of similar crisis going on, said to an astonished array of other Treasury ministers from around the world, he said, "It's our currency, your problem." And I think that pretty much sums up the thinking of the central bank here. I mean, their only mandate is to create stable prices in America and full employment in America, and they do that with monetary policy. Now, the thing to remember, of course, is inside a country, £3 is the same as $3 is the same as €3. In other words, you can't charge any more than about $10, €10 or £10 sterling for a cinema ticket. You can't charge any more than about $28,000 for a new car, €28,000, 28,000, whatever it is. But that's within the country. When you're going outside the country, US travelers, as Laura was saying just now, are going to benefit enormously from a very, very strong dollar against, for example, sterling. I mean, for years, the dollar was worth about 160 against the pound sterling, and now it's 120. That's a massive, massive difference. So from the central bank's point of view, you know, like all of these things, it is a balance. And so they have to remember that a strong dollar could hurt US exports and dent sales, definitely. But also, on the other hand, a strong dollar could help US companies here buying raw materials over there in Europe. They benefit from the strong dollar. They benefit from the weaker euro. In theory, when they bring their goods back here and sell them, that is anti-inflationary. In theory, that brings inflation down. So that's the balance that's going on. Now, tomorrow morning at 12:30 GMT Wednesday, we're going to have a very bit of important data. It is the latest CPI, consumer price inflation. And I have to tell you, it's not looking good. Economists here expect inflation to have gone up to 8.8% when that information comes out in just under 24 hours' time. And at the moment, the stocks are down because of that thought. Guys?
Again, inflation at 40-year highs already. It's interesting to watch that. John Terrett in New York, thank you for that update. Let's get some more analysis now and talk to Klaus Vistersen, who's the chief Eurozone economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Thanks for coming on the programme. I need to know, though, I mean, does it matter if a euro is worth a dollar?
The level doesn't matter as such, but parity in euro-dollar does mean that euro is very weak on a historical basis. I mean, make no mistake about that. I mean, we have to go back, I think, to the beginning of the 2000s before to see a similar value. So, you know, the value itself doesn't matter, but it does signify that euro-dollar is weak in a historical context.
And how might it affect energy prices and inflation?
Well, this is the problem for the Eurozone economy at the moment, is that normally the Eurozone as an export-oriented economy would welcome a weaker euro, and that's still the case. But in economics, we talk about a J-curve, and in the near term, this is just not what the Eurozone economy needs. The cost of energy imports are going to go up. Inflation, to the extent that that's driven by import prices, is going to go up. So for the ECB, this is another headache. They're going to raise rates this month. They're going to raise rates again in September, even as the economy slows down. So, you know, the Eurozone is very close to, if not already in, some form of stagflation at the moment, and a weaker currency doesn't help at this point.
But as you mentioned, Europe's very much an export-driven economy, so the logic would dictate then that a falling euro would be good for that. Is it a question of these supply chain issues and that crunch just putting the stoppers on it?
Yeah, it's also a question of lags. I mean, I think for us economists, we certainly recognize that a weaker euro will boost Eurozone exports, but that doesn't happen in the next 3 to 6 months. That happens maybe next year. So there's a little bit of deferred benefit here in terms of a weaker euro. Certainly, I think, you know, if you and I speak again in 12 months, it's very likely that we'll be telling a completely different story about Eurozone export competitiveness. But in the near term, and right in sort of the next couple of months, you know, for the ECB in particular, a weaker euro will probably raise their inflation forecasts further, and that again is going to increase the pressure on them to raise rates faster than markets and the economy would like.
I'm going to take you up on the offer of speaking to you again, but let's not leave it 12 months. Klaus Vistersen from Pantheon Macroeconomics, thank you very much.
Around 1,000 protesters have blocked a bridge in Budapest to demonstrate against a tax increase on hundreds of thousands of small companies. It's the first major protest against Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán since he was re-elected in April. Inflation in the country is at a 20-year high, and the currency is trading at a record low. Our correspondent Giles Gibson is in Budapest. Giles, what has sparked this protest?
Well, Jamie, things are at a bit of a standoff at the moment. As you can see just behind me, there is this tram that is trying to get across this bridge right in the centre of Budapest. So far, the protesters have decided they are not going to move. They are not budging. The people who were on that tram had to get off and walk off the bridge, and so far, things are just not moving. It's stalemate, really. This protest started just around the corner from here at the Parliament. A crowd gathered to protest against these changes to the tax system for the self-employed as well as for the owners of small businesses. The government are basically arguing that the system had been taken advantage of and that the rules needed to be tightened up. The protesters then moved to this bridge. It's called Margaret Bridge. It's one of the main crossings over the River Danube in the heart of the Hungarian capital, and they've been camped out here basically ever since. If you're a pedestrian or a bicycle, you can still get across, but as you can see, no cars, no trams are currently getting over this main bridge right in the heart of the city. The protesters then stayed, they listened to the proceedings in Parliament just around the corner, and then over the course of the afternoon, lawmakers decided to vote to approve that legislation, so those changes are now set to take effect in September of this year. As you can see, though, the protesters are not going anywhere. They are still staying on this bridge, despite the fact that that vote has now gone through Parliament.
Giles, of course, while all of this is going on, the central bank raised interest rates again.
Yeah, that's right. As we saw this kind of standoff on this bridge, not far from here, the Hungarian central bank decided that they were going to raise the base interest rate from 7.75% up to 9.75%. That brings it in line with what's known as the weekly deposit rate, which was changed last week, also up to 9.75%. What the central bank are trying to do here, similar to what we've just been hearing about, really, they're trying to shore up the local currency, the forint, which has been plunging against the US dollar and the euro in recent weeks. They are also trying to just get a hold on inflation, which is really rising pretty rapidly here in Hungary. It's currently running at around 14%. Hungary is not alone in this kind of situation in this region. We're seeing a similar story really playing out in places like Poland and the Czech Republic. But as you can see behind me with this protest, as inflation soars, you're also just seeing general economic anxiety rising amongst the population as well, Jamie.
Giles, thank you for that. Our correspondent Giles Gibson in Budapest.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the battle between big tech and the Kremlin. Mo finds Google in a row over editorial policy and storage of Russian data. There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Ukraine says that its forces have hit a weapons depot in a Russian-held part of southern Ukraine. Moscow claims the overnight rocket strike on the facility in Kherson targeted a civilian area, leaving 7 dead.
Meanwhile, 12 people are reported to have been injured in a Russian strike on the city of Mykolaiv. Let's talk to John Gambrell from the Associated Press in Lviv. John, these pictures seem to show a huge detonation at the site in Kherson. What more do we know about what happened?
This strike overnight saw a massive explosion in the city of Novokova, which is to the east of Kherson City, which the Russians have held for a while now. Now, when we watch videos of this explosion, there's an initial blast and then followed by a lot of secondary explosions that typically signals that there's explosives, ammunition, or any other kind of flammable material at a site of an explosion. Now, the Ukrainians are saying that they hit an arms depot that the Russians had there. The Russians are trying to claim that it was a civilian site, but have offered no evidence to support this. Now, satellite images analyzed by the Associated Press today of this site showed that the warehouse that was once there is just gone. It's been obliterated. There's a crater that's some 20 meters by 20 meters right where that warehouse was. Now, this suggests that this was another strike by the American-made HIMARS missile system. These are these missiles that are on the back of trucks that the Ukrainians have been able to use pretty successfully against Russian positions. They have a range of some 80 kilometers. And it comes, as we've seen, the Ukrainians take a village near Kherson and starting to make some comments suggesting that they might launch a counteroffensive to try to retake territory down there. But we'll just have to wait to see if that pans out.
Meanwhile, another apartment block shelling has taken place in Mykolaiv.
In Mykolaiv, we've seen days of Russian shelling there, and today was no different. There was a rocket fire attack that hit civilian areas as well as 2 medical facilities, causing injuries. Now, this is just coming as Mykolaiv is right near the front line, and as authorities there say that they've been targeted in part because the Ukrainians were successful in hitting this ammunition depot that we mentioned just now. Now, one thing to keep in mind as well about Mykolaiv is that authorities there say that the Russians are increasingly starting to use S-300 rockets, these missiles, these surface-to-air missiles, to target the city. Now, this is very strange because the S-300 is a surface-to-air missile that is designed to hit either missiles in the air, aircraft, or any other sort of air defense function. These missiles are not designed to hit targets on the land. They don't have the payload. They don't have the right GPS for it. So the fact that the Russians are using this, analysts say, is a sign that they're running out of the precision weapons that they need to be able to conduct more precise strikes, and this raises the risk for Ukrainian civilians caught in this war.
John, Governor of Donetsk says up to 80% of the population may now have fled. Are there signs of people arriving in other parts of Ukraine?
Yes, the governor there said that of the 1.7 million people who once called that place home, there's now over some 300,000. It's a mass exodus from there. There are still people who are there. Some of them are elderly. Others don't want to leave their homes. And some just don't have the means to escape, even as officials warn that the fighting is just going to creep closer and closer there. Now, this comes as there's some 6 million internally displaced, or 6 million displaced Ukrainians in this conflict. Some 5 million of them are in countries that are in Europe. The other million and plus are in Ukraine, internally displaced. Some of them are here in Lviv in western Ukraine. Others are in Kyiv and other areas. It just goes to show that as the longer this war goes on, the more people that are displaced and the more pressure it's putting on the internal systems that the Ukrainians have to care for people, whether that be food or medical care. Now, today we did see the Americans say that they're going to provide another $1.7 billion to help pay for nurses, doctors, and other medical professionals as hospitals and clinics continue to be targets in this war.
John, thanks for that. John Gambrell from the Associated Press in Lviv.
Both Ukraine and Russia are keeping quiet about how many of their soldiers have been killed in the invasion. Estimates put the figure at tens of thousands.
Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger joined mourners at a military funeral in Ukraine.
A mother burying her 27-year-old son. Images that show the impact of the war in Ukraine. and the reach of its tragedy. Andrei Verkhovliad was the pride of all Novohrad-Volhynsky, a small town west of Kiev. In just 6 years, the young man worked his way up from group commander to major. Hundreds came with flowers to bid him farewell for the last time.
He is the bravest man of Ukraine. He's a very brave man. He was a very brave man, and we will remember him forever.
While deployed in Svitlodarsk in the Donetsk province, Andrei got ambushed by Russians and suffered fatal injuries. His brother.
He arrived at his position and unfortunately the battle began and he and his colleagues were killed. My brother paid with his life to keep this position. The Russian forces were successfully stopped and couldn't gain new territory on that day.
The exact number of casualties suffered by the Ukrainian army is unknown. The figure has not been disclosed by the government, but just a month ago Kyiv reported that every day up to 200 Ukrainian soldiers were being killed.
Russian artillery is much stronger than that of Ukraine. Timur, a childhood friend and comrade in arms, was also stationed at the front line.
Being a soldier, I was prepared for a lot of things, but I didn't expect the combat to be this hard. It is unreal.
Ukraine estimates the casualties on the Russian side to be higher, counting so far roughly 37,000 killed soldiers. Moscow has previously reported far less Russian casualties. While Andrei's mother now has the terrible certainty, other parents continue to fear for the lives of their children, many of them in vain. Johannes Bleshberger, CGTN, Novohrad-Volhynsky, Ukraine.
The United States claims that Iran may be about to supply drones to Russia to help boost its military capabilities. The White House says intelligence reports suggest that Russian troops may receive training from Iran to use the devices. Similar drones have played a key role in the conflict in Ukraine. And our correspondent Stuart Smith's in Moscow, and a reminder that journalists in Russia are working under media laws which do restrict what they can report. Stuart, what do we know about this possible deal with Tehran?
Well, the only information comes from the United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who's been talking to reporters about what US intelligence believes is going on here. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Iran has neither confirmed nor denied the story, and there's been no response from Moscow. But going off what the US is saying, a few hundred drones have been either agreed to be delivered to Russia or partly already been delivered to Russia. These drones would be both surveillance drones as well as drones able to carry weaponry. And the deal between Iran and Russia might help with Russia's lack of similar equipment which the Ukrainian armed forces do currently make use of. We know that these drones, apart from that they are in the number of around 100 and will be able to use surveillance and weapons, there's little more information. But it's something that potentially the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Iranian counterpart President Raisi could talk about when they meet next week. This was announced by the Kremlin on Tuesday. They're going to be in Tehran with the Turkish President Erdogan to talk about ostensibly Syria, but also there will be an opportunity then to discuss the outcome of a talk between Ukraine, Russia, the United Nations and Turkey on grain on Wednesday. And so finally seems like there is progress being made on that issue, although the United Nations Secretary General is warning that there's still a lot more to be worked out.
Let's move from geopolitics to business, because two big tech companies are in the Moscow courts today.
That's right, and even more than two. Zoom as well, which we're all familiar with from video conferencing, and one called Ookla, which is a speed testing service. Both it, Zoom and Apple have all been fined low tens of thousands of dollars, but still notable because they have, according to the Moscow courts, to localize Russian citizens' data. It's something that many companies have been caught out doing here in Russia. It's why LinkedIn is banned, and it's happened to Twitch. They were fined 2 million rubles last month. So this is, for Apple, it's around $34,000. For Zoom and Ookla, it's $17,000. But separately, but also today, Google was fined. Again, a small amount, around $1,000. But this was due to its lack of action on a complaint by a person of Russia that was included in a video by the opposition leader Alexei Navalny on his YouTube channel. YouTube's still free to view here in Russia, but in this video, Roskomnadzor, the internet regulator, says that the personal details of somebody were broadcast in that video, which was against their rights in terms of data protection. So Google fined too. Having said that, Google declared bankruptcy for its Russian operation last month after being fined substantially more. We're talking about 134 million US dollars, and so it's not clear who will be picking up that fine. That fine, the major one, around 5 to 10% of Google's turnover, was because the court said YouTube deliberately promotes the dissemination of misleading information about the progress of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you for the update.
One of Russia's top gold mining companies is to go into administration after its lender was hit by global sanctions imposed after the invasion of Ukraine. Petropavlovsk had borrowings with the banking arm of the state-controlled gas giant Gazprom, but it failed to meet a payment on a $200 million credit facility in April. The group, which has struggled to find a new backer, has applied to have its shares suspended from trading on London markets.
Spain will introduce temporary and extraordinary taxes on power companies and financial institutions to help Spaniards with soaring energy prices and inflation. The move was announced by Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. He said the tax in 2023 and 2024 would bring in $2 billion from power companies and $1.5 billion from financial institutions.
UK retail sales have fallen to a rate not seen since the worst months of the pandemic. The British Retail Consortium shows sales falling for a third consecutive month in June as soaring inflation hit households. Shoppers are also opting for cheaper brands and cutting back on buying large items like home appliances.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. The contest to replace Boris Johnson as British Prime Minister heats up.
What I show of China is what I really experience in China, and it's very different to what people in the West experience in China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
I think it's fantastically important to educate British people about Chinese history and culture.
We have sown seeds which in China have grown to very big trees.
The values of horsemanship, respect, responsibility, compassion can be extended to all relationships.
My name is Max. I'm a food blogger. I grew up in China. Now I live in the UK.
We deserve respect, and the Chinese people, their own culture, also deserve respect.
For cross-cultural understanding, I think food is a really good place to start. I hope to spread awareness of all the different cultures within China. I think there's a lot to share.
To increase understanding between cultures, I think time and patience is of course important, but the most important thing is responsibility.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our main stories. Stop selling airline tickets. The order from the UK's biggest airport as Heathrow struggles to process post-pandemic passenger numbers. And level pegging. The euro falls to its lowest value against the US dollar in 20 years. We'll be in Brussels and New York with all the analysis.
In the UK, candidates have been launching their bids to become the new Conservative Party leader and next Prime Minister. One of the front-runners is the former Finance Minister, Rishi Sunak, who's warned against demonising his former boss, Boris Johnson. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson is following the story. Andrew, the opposition Labour Party had planned to call a no-confidence vote in the UK government today. What's going on? What's happened?
Well, yeah, Jamie, a classic case of hitting the government while it's on its knees with this idea of calling a vote of no confidence. That, in principle, could lead to a general election. If a government is found to not hold the confidence of the majority in Parliament, then the country goes to the polls. It was making mischief as far as Labour was concerned. What they wanted to do was prize some of those Tory MPs away from supporting the government and going against Boris Johnson, because they filed a motion saying they had no confidence in the government and in Boris Johnson. So they pinpointed government and individual. Well, because they went for both, the Leader of the House of Commons said that's not the way we do things, that's not constitutional, and he disallowed it. So it's not going to go ahead at all. Now, if it had gone ahead, frankly, Tory MPs, the last thing they want is a general election right now where they don't have a leader, so they would have seen it off with their comfortable majority that they hold there. Nonetheless, it was an attempt by Labour, a failed one now, to start missing at the time when the Tories are at their most vulnerable and they're most confused.
Now, this large field of candidates for Conservative Party leader and the next Prime Minister will be whittled down substantially by tonight. Who are the front-runners?
Well, we've got some well-known names and not so well-known names in the front stable at the moment, Jamie. I think the information I'm getting currently is that most of these candidates will pass the first hurdle. First hurdle is tonight. By 6 o'clock, they've got to prove they have the support of at least 20 of their colleagues. Now, we know Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, already has that. Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, has that. Penny Mordaunt as well, a former Defence Minister under Theresa May. She also has that support. And we think that Tom Tugendhat, the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, also has a 20 MP support. But frankly, it's looking like they've all got the numbers to be able to get past the first post, apart from Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who's dropped out. He doesn't have the numbers. And also another candidate who is treated rather like a joke candidate, a man called Raymond Christie, who's a backbencher, who also got no support at all. So the 11 has now been whittled down to 9, but I wouldn't be surprised if at least 7 of those make it through. Now, the approach they're taking so far is that they're honest, that they're turning their back on the Johnson, expressing support for what it stood for in terms of Brexit and in terms of tax cuts. But the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has gone slightly a different way, saying that he wants to keep managing the economy carefully and only bring in tax cuts further along down the line. But I have to say, as far as the parliamentary party is concerned, he has got the most support. This was his launch speech today.
Tackle inflation, grow the economy and cut taxes. It is a long-term approach that will deliver long-term gains for families and businesses across the United Kingdom. I am prepared to give everything I have in service to our nation, to restore trust, rebuild our economy and reunite the country. I want to have a grown-up conversation where I can tell you the truth. A better future is not given, it is earned.
Well, in about 15, 20 minutes' time, that's where the fun starts. This will move extremely quickly. It always does with Conservative leadership competitions. We'll end up with quite a large field tonight, and then that will go to the first votes tomorrow. All the candidates have to get at least 30 votes from their colleagues to stay in the race, or they're out. That will whittle quite a few out, I imagine, and then it'll go on and on until they're down to 2. It'll move very fast, and this is how it works. For example, Rishi Sunak at the moment, we estimate, has probably a support of something like 45, way ahead of the others. Right-wingers like Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, they're probably in the low 20s at the moment. But as soon as one or other of Truss or Mordaunt drops out, where do those 20 votes go? They will probably go to the other right-wing candidate. All of a sudden, Rishi Sunak is facing a much tougher task ahead of him. So the horse trading will start almost immediately, as candidates that see that they can't make it will start going to other candidates for promises about what sort of job they'll have in their future government. government should they win, and all the rest of it. What's really interesting as well is when you get to 2, then it's taken out of the hands of the parliamentary party and goes out into the country. 160,000 members of the Tory party waiting to vote on the final 2, and they get the whole summer to do it. They vote by post, and they deliver their result to the 1922 committee for the 5th of September. That's when the UK will learn who leads the Conservative Party and who is the new Prime Minister. It's going to be a long summer.
Andrew, thanks for that. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
More now on the chaos affecting us around the world as the aviation industry struggles to deal with post-pandemic demand. In Spain, Ryanair cabin crew have begun another 4-day walkout over pay and working conditions. It's affecting 10 airports across the country, including Madrid, Barcelona and Ibiza. Similar walkouts by EasyJet staff will go ahead later this week. So let's go to Madrid Airport now, where our correspondent Rahul Pathak is waiting. I hope you're not due to fly anywhere, Rahul. Look, these Ryanair strikes, the latest in a string of industrial disputes hitting European holidaymakers. Talk us through it.
Well, initially, this disruption didn't really cause much disruption, but it is increasingly starting to change. There's more and more strike action planned, obviously there's strike action today, and there's more and more people head off for their big summer holidays. The real big getaway here, much like in England, is in August. So last week the unions claimed that over 200 flights here in Madrid were cancelled, with 1,200 delayed. However, Ryanair claimed that the strike is very poorly supported, it's not having much of an impact, and they seem to have no desire to get around that negotiating table. Here's my report. It's turning into a summer of chaos for the airline industry. Staffing shortages across the board have led to cancellations, delays and long-term reductions in flights. Low-cost carrier Wizz Air has just announced a 5% cut in its capacity throughout the high season. They claim staffing numbers are too low to carry out a full service. British Airways, Lufthansa and KLM have all cancelled services for similar reasons. Europe's largest airline by passenger numbers, Ryanair, faces more industrial action from its Spanish cabin crew staff. Those most affected are the staff hired through recruitment agencies. They say the Irish airline doesn't respect basic employment law and refuses to pay the minimum wage. Spain's Transport Ministry imposed a minimum service law that around 80% of Ryanair flights must be operational. This, they claim, is to protect the tourism industry. However, those who are striking feel let down.
We don't understand how can it be after 5 years exposing the poor working conditions that we have in Spain. How can the Spanish government is not doing anything to protect its workers here in Ryanair?
Now, the unions have called for 12 more days of strike action, including 24-hour stoppages throughout the month of July. The collective action is designed to cause maximum disruption in the hope of bringing the airline to the negotiating table. The unions claim that over 200 flights were cancelled with more than 1,200 delays last week. The airline bosses have taken a tough stand against them, but union leaders say they're beginning to drum up more support across Europe.
Airline pilots are also willing to strike on the 23rd and 24th in France and Belgium. We've talked also to our colleagues in the UK cabin crew. They are considering to vote in order to go for a strike in August. And the rest of the countries that have traditionally joined our struggle, I think that they are thinking as well of taking actions.
EasyJet staff also look set to resume industrial action later this week. It's been a particularly challenging time for those stuck in the middle, the passengers, and it may be a while before the smiles return on those looking to get away for a relaxing holiday. Yeah, I don't think there's going to be much evidence of smiles at European airports this summer. You probably might have to have more of a stiff upper lip instead. Back to you.
Rahul in Madrid, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, out of this world, NASA releases stunning colour images of the distant cosmos. We'll be talking to a leading astronomer next.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. NASA has released the first image from the world's most advanced space telescope, and it's certainly impressive. This is the deepest, most detailed view of the universe ever captured. The picture shows elements of the universe as they were 13 billion years ago, reshaping our understanding of the cosmos. Part of this image shows light from soon after the Big Bang. It's the first of several pictures to be released over the next few days.
NASA's no stranger to first steps, and as we enter this new era of spaceflight and discovery, we need to be bold. We have to take risk, but the reward is worth the risk.
Worth is Emeritus Distinguished Professor of Astronomy and Astrophysics at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He joins us from the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, where the James Webb Mission Operations Center is based. Professor, welcome. Good to see you. How excited are you?
Absolutely blown away. Thank you very much for having me on. This is an amazing morning. I've seen in an hour an incredible number of images, probably more science, new science, novel science than I've ever seen at one time in my life.
What could this show?
So this image of the very distant galaxies, Webb was designed to find the first galaxies. And 20 years ago, even longer, we were talking about that. And so this image is one that will be used by astronomers to really probe to the very earliest times, further back than Hubble has been able to do, than any of our other telescopes in ground or in space. It is truly a magnificent, deep image and just beautiful to look at.
And explain to us what happens next after receiving these images. What research might be undertaken into these images?
Yes, so the images that were shown today were really designed to demonstrate that Webb is working, and it is working astonishingly well. So what will happen next is that the data will become available in the next day or so, and then astronomers images digging out clues to what's happening for forming stars, for the earliest galaxies, trying to understand the nature of planets around and other stars near us, exoplanets. So the range of science is huge, and that's sort of why I just felt that this last hour has just been just blown me away with the absolute power of Webb.
In terms of understanding other galaxies, where are we as a layman? Can you explain that to us?
Yes, so we're on a galaxy, and the universe is now 13.8 billion years old, hugely old. But what these telescopes allow us to do is to go back in time to see the light that has taken 13.5 billion years to reach us from the very earliest little seed galaxies, the baby galaxies that formed soon after the universe began, a few 100 million years. So we are looking with this image, we'll be looking into it, trying to find the tiny little red dots in there that we can then characterize as being from those early times and giving us information about the very earliest tiny little galaxies, which have grown, of course, to become our great Milky Way that we live in today.
Professor, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme, and I hope we get to talk again in the coming weeks and months as the research is analysed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Monkeypox could become endemic in Britain if urgent action isn't taken. That's the warning from experts. British sexual health professionals have criticised the government's handling of monkeypox. They warn the outbreak could last months and risk the virus becoming endemic. They also warn of a shortage of smallpox vaccines used to protect high-risk groups from the disease. Four-time Olympic champion Mo Farah has revealed in a BBC documentary that he was trafficked from Djibouti into the UK using another child's name. The long-distance runner was brought to London at 9 years old by a stranger and forced to work as a domestic servant before starting school aged at 12. His real name is Hussein Abdi Kahin. Farah had previously said he came to the UK from Somalia with his parents as a refugee.
Most people know me as Mo Farah, but it's not my name, or it's not the reality. The real story is I was born in Somaliland, north of Somalia, as Hussein Kahin. Despite what I've said in the past, my parents never lived in the UK. When I was 4, my dad was killed in a civil war. You know, as a family, we were torn apart.
As Executive Director of UN AIDS and an Under-Secretary General at the United Nations, Winnie Byanyama's mission is to make sure AIDS is no longer a public health threat by the year 2030.
It's a challenge she says is within reach. She spoke to CGTN Europe as part of our series My First Job and told us when starting out she quickly learned there was one sweet way to motivate an audience.
First paid job I ever did was when I was in high school, and I got a job to work as an assistant teacher at my high school. And I would prepare mark books for her, prepare the class for her, and sometimes teach the other girls. That was so exciting, to be a little teacher in a classroom. I learned that the girls in the class responded to me better if I rewarded them every time they did something good. So I would actually put my money into buying sweets, candies, and every time they got an exercise right, they got a candy. They loved me.
And to find out more about our new series, check out CGTN's social media accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, and search for My First Job.
And finally, it might be as close to Jesus and the Holy Grail as you can get. A treasure hunter known as the Dutch Indiana Jones has recovered one of the most valuable artefacts of the Catholic Church. The ornate golden shrine is said to contain 2 vials of the blood of Jesus from his crucifixion. The relic was in an abbey in northern France for 1,000 years before it was stolen in June. The art detective, called Arthur Brand, claimed a curse would have been placed on the thieves, and so they left the relic on his doorstep in the middle of the night.
Sounds like the stuff of a good thriller, doesn't it? Hollywood movie. The headlines again. Stop selling airline tickets. The order from the UK's biggest airport as Heathrow struggles to process post-pandemic passenger numbers.
Well, pegging. The euro falls to its lowest value against the US dollar in 20 years.
And in the next few minutes, we hope to have a short list of candidates vying to become leader of the Conservative Party and Britain's next Prime Minister.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Daily Motion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.